The atmosphere changed the moment the ball left the bat. Not gradually. Not after the outfielder turned around. The entire stadium reacted instantly, as if everybody inside already knew they had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. And maybe that was exactly why the comments that came afterward became so controversial. Because what happened that night didn't just frustrate the Colorado Rockies. It embarrassed them. And by the end of the game, one emotional claim from a Rockies coach had become so uncomfortable that Major League Baseball itself reportedly stepped in almost immediately to shut the entire thing down and defend Shohei Ohtani. What started as a brutal home run quickly turned into one of the most awkward post-game controversies of the season. Not because anyone officially accused Ohtani of cheating, but because of how desperate the reaction sounded after he destroyed another baseball in front of the entire country. The Dodgers entered the night carrying momentum that already felt dangerous for the rest of the league. Every series lately seemed to follow the same pattern. Opposing teams would stay competitive early, sometimes even believing they had a real chance, only for one swing, one inning, or one Ohtani moment to completely change the emotional direction of the game. The Rockies understood the challenge ahead of them. They knew they could not afford mistakes. Against normal lineups, small errors can be survived. Against the Dodgers, and especially against Ohtani, one mistake can turn an entire night upside down. And for the first 2 innings, Colorado actually looked prepared. Their pitcher attacked the zone confidently. Their defense stayed sharp. The dugout remained energized. There was tension in the stadium, but not panic. Not yet. The Rockies looked like a team that believed they could fight. Then Ohtani stepped into the batter's box again. The count was balanced. The pitcher took a deep breath before beginning his delivery. The crowd buzzed quietly in anticipation, the kind of nervous sound that only appears when a superstar is about to swing. And then came the pitch. Ohtani's swing looked smooth. Almost too smooth. There was no violent effort. No exaggerated movement. Yet the sound of contact exploded through the stadium differently from every other hit that night. Some fans rose immediately before even locating the ball. The Rockies' outfield barely reacted. One player simply froze and stared upward. The baseball carried deep into the night sky before disappearing far beyond the wall. The crowd erupted instantly. Not because it was surprising anymore, but because somehow Ohtani continued making impossible things look routine. The scoreboard changed. Ohtani calmly rounded the bases. And inside the Rockies' dugout, the emotional atmosphere began collapsing. Cameras caught players staring silently toward the field. Coaches folded their arms with blank expressions. The replay continued running across the giant stadium screens from angle after angle, and somehow every replay looked worse for Colorado. What seemed to bother them most wasn't just the distance of the home run. It was how effortless it looked. Great players hit home runs all the time. Baseball players understand that. But what becomes mentally exhausting is when greatness starts looking casual. And that was the feeling growing around Ohtani throughout the league. He no longer looked like someone getting hot for a few weeks. He looked like someone operating on an entirely different level from everybody else on the field. The inning eventually ended, but the emotional frustration remained. And that frustration followed Colorado directly into the post-game press conference room. At first, the comments sounded harmless. A little sarcastic. A little bitter. The kind of emotional reaction that usually disappears after losses. But this time, reporters immediately noticed something uncomfortable in the tone. One Rockies coach leaned back in his chair, shook his head slowly, and laughed under his breath before speaking. "I don't even know how a ball carries like that," he said. A few reporters exchanged quick glances. Some smiled awkwardly while others immediately looked down at their laptops to start typing. Because the statement did not sound like admiration. It sounded like disbelief mixed with frustration. And then the coach continued speaking. It didn't even look like a full swing. But somehow it ends up halfway into the seats. At some point you stop understanding what you're watching. The room became quieter after that. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody openly challenged the statement. But the direction of the conversation had already changed. The problem was not simple frustration. Baseball is emotional. Players and coaches say emotional things after losses constantly. The problem was what the comments sounded like they were implying. Within minutes, clips from the press conference spread across social media. Fans accused the Rockies of disrespecting Ohtani because they could not stop him. Former players quickly jumped into the conversation defending him. Analysts called the remarks embarrassing and emotional. But the most important reaction reportedly came from Major League Baseball itself. Normally, MLB avoids getting involved in emotional post-game comments unless something crosses a very obvious line. But this situation escalated rapidly because Ohtani is not just another superstar. He is the face of modern baseball. And according to several insiders around the league, MLB officials contacted members of the Rockies organization shortly after the comments started spreading online. The league reportedly wanted to make one thing very clear. There would be no manufactured controversy surrounding Ohtani's legitimacy. No vague accusations. No emotional insinuations left floating around without clarification. Suddenly, what began as a painful loss for Colorado had turned into something much worse. Now the story wasn't simply about Ohtani's home run anymore. It was about how badly the Rockies appeared to be handling it emotionally. Inside the Dodgers clubhouse, the atmosphere felt completely different. Relaxed. Confident. Almost amused. By now, Dodgers players had seen Ohtani do impossible things so many times that shock barely existed anymore. Yet even inside their own clubhouse, players continued reacting to moments like this differently. One teammate reportedly laughed while replay footage rolled on television screens nearby. Another simply shook his head silently. Because even among elite athletes, some swings still defy explanation. When Dave Roberts finally stepped into the press conference room, reporters immediately shifted toward the controversy surrounding the Rockies' comments. Roberts already looked prepared for the questions. He sat calmly at the podium with almost no visible emotion, but his voice sharpened slightly when the remarks were mentioned. A reporter asked whether he believed the comments crossed the line. Roberts paused briefly before answering carefully. I think sometimes people see something special for so long that they start trying to explain it away. The room stayed silent. Roberts continued speaking slowly. But there's nothing mysterious happening here. Shohei works harder than almost anybody in baseball. What you're seeing is preparation meeting talent. There was no anger in his response. And somehow that made it even stronger. He didn't sound defensive. He sounded completely certain. That certainty changed the atmosphere in the room immediately. Another reporter asked whether Ohtani himself had reacted emotionally to the controversy. Roberts smiled slightly before answering. He usually doesn't care about that stuff. That answer triggered quiet laughter because everybody understood it was true. Ohtani almost never publicly reacts to drama. He doesn't chase arguments. He doesn't feed controversy. And perhaps that is what frustrates opponents most. While everybody else grows emotional around him, Ohtani simply keeps playing baseball. Later in the game, with the Dodgers already holding control, Ohtani returned to the plate once again. The crowd rose before the pitcher even delivered the next pitch. That's the kind of tension Ohtani creates now every single at-bat. Fans expect something unbelievable every time he swings. This time, the Rockies pitcher worked far more carefully. No easy fastballs. No mistakes near the center of the plate. The count became full. The pressure inside the stadium built with every pitch. And then Ohtani drove another baseball deep into the gap for extra bases. The crowd exploded again, and this time the reaction inside the Rockies' dugout looked even worse. Cameras caught coaches sitting silently with defeated expressions. The emotional energy was gone. They no longer looked angry. They looked exhausted. After the game ended, reporters crowded around Ohtani's locker waiting for some kind of reaction to the controversy. A Japanese reporter finally asked whether he had heard about the Rockies coach's comments. Ohtani adjusted his cap slightly before answering calmly. "I'm just trying to help the team win games." That was all he said. No anger. No sarcasm. No emotional counterattack. Just one quiet sentence. And somehow that response made the entire situation feel even more uncomfortable for Colorado. Because while the Rockies spent hours reacting emotionally to him, Ohtani barely seemed interested in the controversy at all. As the night continued, more insiders around baseball began revealing details about MLB's reaction behind the scenes. League officials reportedly became uncomfortable with how quickly emotional speculation had spread from vague comments into national conversation. Especially given baseball's recent sensitivity regarding integrity issues, the league had no interest in allowing even indirect suspicion surrounding its biggest international superstar. Around baseball, people understood exactly why MLB moved quickly. Ohtani represents something much larger than one player or one team now. He represents the global image of baseball itself. Explosive talent. International popularity. Historic versatility. And perhaps most importantly, the ability to make younger fans believe they are watching something genuinely unique. That is why the Rockies' comments landed so badly across the baseball world. Not because they directly accused him of anything, but because they sounded like emotional frustration searching desperately for explanations. Former MLB players began speaking about the controversy on television almost immediately. One retired pitcher laughed during a broadcast and said, "When hitters start making you feel helpless, eventually you start inventing explanations in your head." Another analyst spoke even more bluntly. That wasn't disrespectful to Ohtani. It was embarrassing for Colorado. Those reactions only intensified pressure on the Rockies organization. By the following morning, reporters noticed several coaches avoiding media questions entirely. Others attempted to soften the original remarks by describing them as harmless frustration after a difficult loss. But the damage had already been done. Baseball fans remembered exactly when those comments happened. They came immediately after Ohtani humiliated them on national television. Meanwhile, the Dodgers simply moved forward as if none of the controversy existed. And perhaps that became the coldest part of the entire story. For Los Angeles, this situation was slowly becoming normal. Another Ohtani home run. Another opposing team emotionally unraveled afterward. Another press conference dominated entirely by conversations about him. Around baseball, people are beginning to realize something uncomfortable. Ohtani's greatness no longer affects opponents only physically. It affects them psychologically. Pitchers approach him differently. Managers overthink every matchup involving him. Entire stadiums grow tense the moment he walks toward the plate. And now even opposing coaches appear emotionally overwhelmed trying to explain what they are witnessing. That is what makes Ohtani different from ordinary superstars. Most great players create pressure during games. Ohtani creates pressure before games even begin. Every team watches the same highlights. Every coaching staff studies the same swings trying to identify weaknesses. Every pitcher searches for some kind of answer. And lately, there simply haven't been many answers available. That creates helplessness. And helplessness eventually becomes emotional.